with us this morning, and Dr. Sally Taylor, Extension Row Crops entomologist. And they'll both be giving us some brief updates on spring small grain updates. So just going to talk a little bit about some recommendations for moving forward this year with our small grain crops. So without any further ado, I guess we'll go ahead and get started. So Wade or Sally, thank y'all for joining us, and whoever wants to go first.
You can go ahead, Wade.
Okay, I will try to do that. Coming through okay?
Yeah, Wade, you're coming through great.
Okay, good. I started to insist that we all did conference call bingo as a part of this, and of course, can you hear me now is one of the major squares for this activity. That's one of the things that makes this so much fun. I also appreciate the opportunity to be able to visit with everybody and conduct some of this virtually. We have, among the specialists, have talked about doing something like this for a number of years, and somewhere between busyness and laziness, it's always gotten sort of pushed to the back burner. So I certainly appreciate and applaud the agents for putting this together. On the small grain side, at this point, we are pretty well a wide diversity. I was in the Shenandoah Valley, late last week for our trials up there. And the flag leaf is not out yet. So we're still looking for aphids and maybe a little powdery mildew in those areas, and probably the same in the northern reaches of Piedmont. By this week, though, even in Blacksburg, we've got all the barley's headed. The flag leaf's out on the wheat. I was just through Blackstone this morning, and of course the barley's been headed there for about a week, and the wheat is just starting to head. So quite a range. In terms of nutrient management, there's not a whole lot that could be done with nitrogen at this stage. We would call liquid fertilizer anyway. Liquid UAN would cause a significant amount of leaf burn, and we do not want to damage the flag leaves. So if you run into a situation where somebody's truly short of nitrogen and you're seeing some deficiencies, we could work out a recipe for urea dissolved in water or something like that. But from my perspective, if that flag leaf's out, I would be really cautious about any more nitrogen on that crop, especially from liquid UAN. The next thing we're watching for is powdery mildew and then leaf rust. It's about mildew season in that it likes temperatures in the 60s and 70s, cool nights in the 50s with plenty of moisture. So conditions are right or soon to be right for mildew. When we put together our variety publications, of course, we rank the varieties for the relative resistance to those diseases. And so I always advise people that are scouting to be aware of what varieties are out there and looking in those fields. We don't want to look in a place, you only look in fields that have highly resistant varieties, for example. We'd be better off to try to find some that are slightly more susceptible for the scouting protocols. Once it starts to show up, it's going to start to show up throughout that region. So once you find the first one, it's just the dominoes are going to fall. The same thing for leaf rust, although we're looking at temperatures in the 70s and 80s for rust to really be happy. So the flag leaves are out. So as temperatures warm up, we'll be on the outlook for rust and treating with fungicides for those. Again, our resistance information is available in the publication. Fungicide information is available in the pest management guide for most appropriate uses. I would say, though, and I think many of you have seen my slide that talks about the data from North Carolina, and where they pulled, 300 or 400 studies where fungicide was applied in wheat, and they went back and studied what we knew about the responses in those particular sites. And based on the assumptions for application in fungicides, they found that just spraying a fungicide on wheat without knowing anything in the field made money about half the time. So it's about half the time it was a losing proposition just made an application regardless of knowledge. That goes up to over 80% if they find any disease at any level in the field. It's profitable 80% of the time. So this is one of those cases where you don't have to be the best scout, but it certainly does pay the time to go look and see what's in the field. The thresholds for those are also in the PMG. It's about 5% leaf rust on the flag leaf, or 3 to 4 pustules of powdery mildew on the leaf below the flag leaf. So the thresholds are very, very low. Much disease in the canopy at all would warrant a fungicide application. And so, it's a very useful thing in terms of the likelihood of a profitable return to those applications. I guess the next piece that I'm seeing on the horizon is spraying for head scab and the conditions for that. And this is probably our biggest worry to date for the rest of the season. All the labels for those advise that you should spray when the head is in mid-flowering. So that's when the little anthers are being pushed out. You'll see those little yellow anthers on the side, stuck to the head, and we know that's when flowering is occurring. The newest products out there, Miravis Ace, has a broader window, but it still has that same recommended date. And I know Hillary's data supports the fact that you can get control, but it's certainly optimum control when it's mid-flowering. So we're still targeting that. As a guide, a rough guide, flowering in our wheat varieties occurs 4 to 6 days after full head emergence. So after the heads emerge, you've got 5 days to mid-flowering. And so that's kind of a timeline or a guide to help know when to need to be ready and to anticipate that a little bit. The only other thing I'd say is around harvest season. Of course, we encourage farmers to have all the equipment components in place and everything ready and lined up to go, because wheat is so sensitive to delayed harvest and the losses that occur due to weathering. But I would also mention the fact that, when weathering does occur, one of the major factors that happens is we lose test weight. Test weight declines because those kernels when they get wet, they swell. When they dry out, they shrink and they wrinkle a little bit, and they don't pack as well after that re-wetting. And so the test weight goes down. And so as that goes on, lose test weight at a fairly rapid rate. It usually is more dependent on the number of cycles, so the number of times it's wet and dry, and not necessarily the total amount of rain, but it can be a cumulative effect as well. My point is, though, that we have some varieties that have genetically higher test weights than others. And so if there's an opportunity to prioritize those varieties with low test weights, genetically low test weights, and get them out of the field before weathering, then I think we'll be better off in terms of the value of the crop. We've got something that we know genetically has a high test weight. Maybe it can stand a little more weathering before it falls below 58 pounds and gets us out of that U.S. number 2. So those are my thoughts about where we are in the season.
Thank you, Wade. We appreciate the update. I guess we'll save all the questions to the end of the presentation, and then folks can hop back to either Wade or Sally. So Sally, if you're ready, we'll go ahead and have you.
Sure, thanks, Robbie. I would like to second what Wade said, in that you don't have to be the best scout to do your own pest management and small grains. It's more about getting out there and looking at your crop. And the good news for insect pest management in wheat, especially in the eastern part of the state, is there are few insects that you're going to have to consistently manage. And the ones that do pop up occasionally are easy to control with fairly inexpensive pesticides. So the calls I've been getting this year and last year have revolved mostly around aphids. And what I think is going on with these is it's just not getting cold enough in our winters to kill enough of the population. They flare back up really quickly as soon as the weather warms, gets above 50 degrees, and don't respond that quickly to warming temperatures. The good news about aphids is rarely in the spring do you want to spend money on controlling them. So I've never seen a yield response to a spray past the 1st of March. So if you're controlling them in February, if you need to, that would be a better investment once we're into March. And certainly April, you have to have a tremendous population to warrant spending money driving over that field. And what I mean by a large population is once plants are above a foot tall, 300 per row feet, or 20 to 25 per grain head. Still, if you have questions, I encourage you to call me or invite me out to your field. I cannot get within 6 feet of you, but I'm also not allowed to be in my office, so I'm more than happy to travel to get away from my children. The other thing this time of year is cereal leaf beetle, and this animal is, I think, more prevalent in my memory than it is in Virginia fields. I was speaking with Wade before we started, and the last time I remember seeing a significant population of this pest was in college, and the shocking part of that was how long ago actually I was in college. These are the small slug-like larvae. There was a time where we walked through the fields and they would stick to your pants leg, and we would call it, at least in North Carolina, a dirty jean threshold, because your pants would turn dark. I haven't seen that in over a decade. Wade said it's been maybe 7 years for anywhere in Virginia outside of the Shenandoah or the mountain regions that he's seen it. So I'm just cautioning you, if this is an application you're still making, maybe with your fungicide, you're throwing in something in the tank to control cereal leaf beetle. A, it's probably not there. B, because of our warming spring temperatures, if it was there, you missed it. So based on our degree day model and how fast the biology of this animal allows it to reproduce, it should have hit its peak lay a couple weeks ago. So if you're not seeing it now, you probably won't see it the rest of the season. And the main reason I'm discouraging you to hold back on that tank mix application of insecticide is to save you money. But the second reason is the animal that is likely in your wheat field, the insect that is hanging out there, is the brown stink bug. It does not cause yield loss in wheat, but it can in vegetative corn. So when we get to wheat harvest and those insects move across the row or across the street or down the road, which they're certainly capable of doing, and that corn is just pre-tassel, you can have some significant yield loss. Why I don't want you to try to control them in wheat is it doesn't work. There's many in fields that have been sprayed that have not been sprayed. By that point, the canopy is so dense, they're very mobile, they're capable of surviving it enough to get away from it. And everything we have labeled to control it in corn is a pyrethroid. They're becoming increasingly harder to kill with a pyrethroid. So if we keep exposing them in wheat prior to when they leave wheat and mate, we're going to lose control of them in corn. And certainly by the time we've sprayed them in wheat and we've sprayed them in corn, we're not going to be able to kill them with a cheap application in soybean. And then we're going to be left with products that work, but maybe are less favorable to using, like Bidrin. I think that's it. Every maybe 10 years or so, we see an armyworm breakout. That was a couple years ago now. If you pay attention to our Ag Pest and Crop Advisory, I will alert you of anything unusual or prevalent that's going on. And other than that, just keep your boots on the ground and an eye on your crop. And as long as everything is healthy and you have a good stand and the plants are growing well, then you are doing the most important thing for insect pest management in wheat. And that's it, Robbie.
All right, thanks, Sally. Thanks to both Sally and Dr. Thomas and Wade for their updates. Does anybody have any questions for our specialist this morning via agents or any of our growers guests?
Robbie, I got one for Wade.
Go ahead, Mike.
Wade, have you seen a reduced tillering in late planted wheat this year? I've noticed some fields in Caroline and King George, up until 3 or 4 weeks ago, you could still see the ground. It looked like it just didn't tiller like it should have. And they were primarily in late planted fields. Have you noticed that across the state, or is this something regional?
No, it's statewide, Mike. And it was surprising to me because of how mild the winter has been. I thought we would have had more growth. I don't know that I have a good answer for that. I think what may have happened to us is that, while the spring has been very mild, we just didn't get very much fall growth. And so, the plants were just not very vigorous, even when conditions turned around and would have been otherwise favorable for them to grow this spring. That's my guess. I am seeing it, though, and you're right. It is late planted wheat, and it tends to be varieties that we would say that are not day length sensitive. So those that tend to, respond mostly to temperatures when they, move from winter dormancy to spring growth. Temperature drives that habit. They tend to be the thinner ones this year.
Thank you. I just want to make sure I'm not losing my mind.
No, and we tried to fix a few of those with nitrogen applications, and we've got them up to 60 or 70 heads, but tillers, but it's not where I wanted to see it go. They just didn't respond as well as I would have liked to have seen them.
Thank you, Wade.
Any other questions for Wade or Sally? Wade, I know you touched briefly in your talk on head scab coming up. It's still a little ways off, but it'll be here before we know it. Can you just talk for just a few seconds on some of the tools and resources that are available for growers to kind of predict conditions for that? I think you and Dr. Mill have been working on some modeling with that, and I think there also is a national scab initiative that gives some predictions. Could you just touch briefly on that for the growers?
Yeah, sure. So the important thing, the disease triangle, right? You have to have the susceptible host, you have to have favorable conditions for infection, and you have to have the causal organism. And Fusarium head blight is very much one of those that requires all three. The organism that causes it also infests corn. And so, if there's corn residue in the field, then obviously the organism is there. We've found that the spores move dozens, if not hundreds of miles in the upper atmosphere. And so, and I think anybody that's done this for a while, you understand that the risk of head scab is greater in fields that have corn residue on that surface of that field. But I've certainly seen severe scab in, a wheat crop that was following clean till vegetables. I mean, there's just enough inoculum in our air. It may be, if we controlled it for an entire county and had no corn or something, we might be able to manage it. But the fact of the matter is that we have the organism, and we're going to have a susceptible host anytime wheat or barley is flowering. So, and then the third piece of that is, the conditions that are right. The environmental conditions are that we need to have free moisture. It usually means rain, but it can also mean some heavy dews or foggy mornings for us in Virginia, because I've seen that happen. Rarely, but it does happen occasionally. So if you have those things, you have rain at flowering, then it's most likely that we're going to have a high incidence of head scab infection. And so there's one very useful tool out there called, actually it was developed at Penn State, but the Head Scab website. And if you just Google search for head scab or Penn State head scab, actually, and I think the URL is headscab.org, but don't quote me on that. That is a model that links temperatures and precipitations out for about 3 days to give you a risk of Fusarium head blight infection. So it gives you a little bit better gauge into what the expectations are for the severity of head scab in any given year. And it's a useful tool. You put in the relative resistance of the variety that you have in the field, your location, and it does the rest in terms of temperature and moisture predictions. And that's a really useful tool in order to understand and anticipate it. The other thing I would tell you is, especially if you're in an area of the state where if you've got somebody who's trying to be a wheat grower and has some high yield potential this year, and if they're in an area where they don't normally treat for this, start now. Make sure the products that we need are on hand at the local retailers in order to be able to make these applications on time, because there is a very short window, maybe a week, in which we have to get all of it done, or we lose efficacy very quickly. What else, Robbie? What did I miss?
No, that's great, Wade. That's exactly what I was hoping for. Just some of those resources that are available for growers to take a look at some of those predictive models and hopefully get a head start before that stuff comes around if we do have pressure this year. So thank you for that. Any other questions for Wade or Sally before we adjourn this morning?
I don't have anything else, Robbie. Were you asking if people had questions?
Yeah, it sounds like everything's quiet, Sally, so I think y'all must have done a perfect job of covering everything and answering everybody's questions this morning. So thank y'all. Once again, I'd like to thank our speakers, Dr. Wade Thomason, Extension Green Specialist, and Dr. Sally Taylor, Extension Row Crops Entomologist, for joining us this morning and taking some time to share these updates with us. So thank y'all again for joining us, and thank you to all the agents and growers and clients that we have on the line with us this morning. We thank y'all again for joining us. We'll be back here again next week, next Thursday, at the same time, 9 a.m. We'll have another guest speaker and hopefully provide some more information that's pertinent and help everybody stay sane during this time and continue to do what everyone does best in the agricultural community. And I think everyone's resilience in the agricultural community right now is just a testament of how things are for us. So appreciate everybody's time this morning. And again, if you didn't catch this meeting, it will be recorded and posted for viewing later on. So just be aware of that. We're going to do that with all of our updates every Thursday. So thanks again for everyone. And